When Nathan first texted me about a couple weeks ago that I would be preaching on a day that normally death is talked about a lot, I'm sure I had the same thought as a lot of you did when Jeff announced that the 25-year-old seminarian field worker would be preaching on a holiday that we talk about death on. Great, I'm sure this will be very interesting, at least. Well, jokes aside, I truthfully don't think about death all that much, or anything about the end of life, or what happens towards the end of our lives. And I don't think that I'm really that alone in that. I don't think it's even a generational thing. I don't think it's just for people that are before, at the time in your life before you start receiving those letters in the mail about AARP. It's not just for that group of people. I don't think anyone likes to think about death. No one likes to think about what happens at the end of this thing that we call life. You see, each time that I go home for a break from school, I have a decision that I got to make. Which of my friends from my entire 25 years of my life am I going to get to see in this 4-day window, and which of them am I not going to get to see? I'm sure so many of you have gone through the same thing throughout the course of your life. You have to prioritize, who do I really want to give my time to and who can't I? And you want to give it to everyone, but you can't in the span of 4 days when you go home for a reading week or a spring break or a Thanksgiving break. Well, last winter, actually, in our first year of seminary, we actually had the ability to go home for 6 weeks. It was a major blessing. I was able to see pretty much everyone that I could have ever wanted to see back home. I was able to hang out with some of my old college friends, some people from the campus ministry that I was involved with, people from my old home church, people that I used to run with, all of the people in my life. But there's one conversation that really stuck out last winter more than any other conversation, any other hangout, any other catch-up that I had for that entire break. It was with a friend of mine who doesn't believe in Jesus. She was born Catholic and has walked away from the faith, and every time that I've ever met up with her, I've had an ulterior motive of sharing the gospel with her. She's one of the people that's on my bookmark with her initials on it of loved and sent that's in my bedroom at home. She's someone that I pray for every single day when the clock strikes noon and I do a noonday prayer for the lost. But last winter, because of the way that my life was, I didn't have an ulterior motive. You see, the first 6 months that I was down here in St. Louis at seminary, I had some really high highs. I mean, we have amazing professors. A few of them are members of our congregation here. We have amazing student community where everyone around you is pursuing the same thing of serving God's people. It's awesome. But I also had quite a few lows in my first 6 months when I moved to St. Louis. From a eye-opening but also very challenging RFE assignment my first 6 months to just trying to balance how am I going to be a student at this full-time thing and also be in an RFE situation and also do our modules and also try and follow Jesus on my own and also try and seek out things that are fun like playing basketball and doing intramurals on campus and just everything being a really hectic mess, to a breakup that happened like a week and a half before finals started. There was just a lot as I got to the end of my very first semester in that winter last year that I was just done. I was ready to go home. I wasn't thinking about dropping out. Don't think that way. But every night when I closed my eyes before bed, I would utter the prayer, God, I know that you have me here for something, but right now I don't see what it is. God, this suffering is real. And so because of all of that background, when I went and I met with my friend at this Italian restaurant in Des Moines, for the first time, I wasn't interested in evangelizing. I was just there. I was just present. And then halfway through the conversation, it just kind of burst out of me. I asked her the question, what do you think about Jesus? Because I think there was something deeper beneath all the things that I was wondering and worried about that I kind of wanted to get from her skeptical, doubting mind. It kind of caused me to gravitate towards not only her, but other people in my life that were non-believers last winter break. And when I said, what do you think about Jesus, her response it sticks out to me because I think it's the answer to why none of us really like to think about death. Her response was, it just seems so simple. Why shouldn't I just try and be a better person instead of come to this church building and just eat a cracker every week? I'm not up here, Jeff, don't worry. I'm not saying I don't believe in the real presence. That's not what the point of the sermon is. The real presence is real. That's not the point in recounting this. The point in recounting this is I think that we all get to that question every now and then. What's the point of all of this? Is it really just that Jesus gives us a Willy Wonka golden ticket that we're supposed to grip onto and white knuckle until one day he comes again in the future? That day that we heard from Isaiah, is that all that there is in this life? Is all of the suffering and the death of our loved ones, the times that we're in the hospital room and that doctor says that the baby's not going to come, is the only thing that we have to hold on to? The fact that maybe 70 years from now it's going to be better? Or is there anything right now that Jesus gives us? And I think Isaiah gives us something right now. To put it another way, does anything in here actually matter to me as I walk out those streets and I go to school or I go to my job or I go home to my family? Or is the only time that this matters when we come up to this altar? Or does it actually impact my here and my now and my day-to-day life? You see, the book of Isaiah has 66 chapters in it. And actually, it's the second most quoted book in the New Testament, or in the Old Testament, by the New Testament. 1 out of every 17 verses in the New Testament includes at least a quote or a reference to the book of Isaiah. It's clearly really important. And there's a lot of themes in the book of Isaiah, but the primary theme you can find in Isaiah's name itself. His name, it means Yahweh saves. Yahweh delivers. Only it's really funny that that's the primary theme of Isaiah's book, because actually, at the time of Isaiah's life, he was prophesying in Judah, and they were in what they called the Silver Age. It was pretty good. It wasn't spiritually good. They were sacrificing to false gods. They had false idols. But on the surface, their life, Isaiah walking around, giving them a bunch of hopeful prophecies, wouldn't have made much sense. They wouldn't have wanted to think about these prophecies that Isaiah was giving them, much like we don't like to think about death because we don't think that it applies to us. They didn't think that those prophecies that Isaiah was giving them that had to deal with these exiles that were 200, and even the one with King Cyrus, 4 centuries into the future. How does that apply to them when they're living in the Silver Age? Doesn't make any sense. It's 50, 60, 70 years down the line. Well, you see, Isaiah, his prophecies, they were actually twofold a lot of the time. They had to deal with the hope that they would need to cling to in these 2 exiles that were to come, and they were ultimately fulfilled in Jesus, and that's what we read today. And actually, it's even threefold. It's filled in when Jesus comes back again. On this mountain the Lord of hosts will make for all peoples a feast rich of food, a feast of well-aged wine, of rich food, of marrow, of aged wine, well refined. This mountain that Isaiah is talking about, it's first referenced in his 2nd chapter, where he talks about the mountain of the Lord, Mount Zion rising up. That's the mountain that on the peak of it, the New Jerusalem, when Jesus comes again, the new heavens and the new earth are going to be there. So that's what this is about. It's about this future hope. And I'm not going to talk about the feast right now. We're going to come back to that later. I want you to hold on to that and remember that. But I want us to back up, actually, as we go into verse 7 and verse 8. And he will swallow up on this mountain the covering that is cast over all peoples, the veil that is spread over all nations. You see, at the very beginning of our Bibles, in Genesis 1, it says that God created the heavens and the earth. And he creates the land and the sea and the animals and the birds and the fish and the plants and the oceans and everything. And after everything that God creates, it says that it was good. And then he creates man in his own image, and he says that it was good. And then we get a repeat of creation in Genesis 2, a close-up and personalized view, where it's told from the perspective of this Garden of Eden, this visible paradise, this literal paradise that Adam and Eve, the first 2 humans, are living in with God. And it's summarized, the 2nd chapter is summarized in the simple words, and they were naked and unashamed. They were completely unashamed before him because they had nothing to be ashamed of. everything was good. They were in perfect relation to their Creator. They were creatures just walking around with their Creator, enjoying Him, as they had been created to be. Nothing more than that. And then, as we all know, the serpent, he slithers in, and he actually deceives Eve, and he deceives Adam, and they take from the fruit that's from the tree. The one thing God told them not to do, they did. The one command, they broke it. And as a result of this sin, as a result of them taking from that fruit, what they do is they cover themselves with fig leaves. They veil themselves. They jump into the bushes. God, he comes walking, and he's like, where are you guys? And they jump out, and they say, when we realized that we were naked, we covered ourselves and we hid from you. And God's like, who told you that you were naked? And they say that the serpent deceived them. And so God's response, it's like you or me. He curses them, he curses the ground, and he curses the serpent. And then he makes for them animal skins to further clothe them, to further veil them from him. Not because he doesn't want to be close to them, but because he knows that because of their sin, they can't be in his presence, otherwise they'd die. And so there's this curse, this veil, because of sin, that is between them and every other human being throughout all of history that separates us from God. And that's what Isaiah is talking about. It gets taken away here. The veil that sin brought into this world, that covering that's over us, that's between us and God, in Jesus Christ's blood, it's gone. Paul, he references it in 2 Corinthians 3 in a different way, but it's conveying the same concept. He's talking about the veil that Moses wore. That veil is ripped away. It's gone. We get to see Jesus. And Isaiah, he goes from talking about this veil of covering to the veil or to death. He will swallow up death forever, Isaiah says. Because the ultimate effect of sin, the ultimate effect of this veil, the ultimate effect of this covering is that we will die. That's the ultimate effect of sin, is death. Death is essentially just eternal veiling from God. Never being able to be naked and unashamed in his presence again. But if that veil is removed in Jesus, as Paul says in 1 Corinthians, then why does it feel like death still stinks here? Why do my loved ones still die? Why, a few years ago, when my uncle died, was I, with my extended family, in my grandparents' living room, weeping over the words of Ecclesiastes 3? Why is it so hard all of the time? Because it's really clear. Paul writes it, that veil is gone. Death is destroyed forever. He says, "Oh, death, where is your victory? Oh, hell, where is your sting?" Death is swallowed up in victory. As a commentary wrote, that as I studied for this, ever since death ran through the veins of Jesus Christ, who is life essential? It is destroyed or swallowed up, like as the bee does when she hath left her sting in the wound. Death is gone forever in Jesus. But it still stinks for me here. There's still a lot of really hard times. It feels like it's just this golden ticket that I'm supposed to hold on to. Why does it feel like the empty tomb of Jesus has absolutely nothing to do with my here and now in the middle of St. Louis in 2023? Why does it feel like I'd be better off just trying to be a good person instead of coming here and eating a cracker each week, in the words of my friend? Because it's more than just a sentiment. If you look in these words from Isaiah, he doesn't end with the greatest enemy, because God knows that we need to first know that death is gone. But he also knows that there's a now, not yet, that we need an extra bit of comfort for to get through. Right after he says he will swallow up death forever, Isaiah says, "And the Lord God will wipe away tears from all faces." He brings it up close and personal. Your tears right now matter to God. They matter to Jesus. In John's Gospel, in chapter 11, we get one of 3 instances where Jesus is recorded crying while he's here on earth. It's when his friend Lazarus dies. and he walks up to the village. He's on the outside of the village, and Mary and Martha, they come and they meet him there. And we hear how Mary, she runs up and she falls at his feet and she says, "Lord, if only you had been there, my brother wouldn't have died. Your friend Lazarus wouldn't have died if you would have been there." And she's weeping and mourning. And it says that Jesus sees that, and when he sees the weeping and the mourning of the other Jews, he's moved and troubled. And then we get the shortest verse in the Bible. Jesus wept. Notice what it is that moves Jesus to weeping. It's not the fact that his friend Lazarus died. I do think that that did move Jesus. When we die, Jesus is moved because he hates the effect of sin on this world. He detests it. But what caused Jesus to cry that day was that he saw the effect on the faces of the loved ones of the deceased. When Mary was weeping, when the Jews that were with them were weeping, Jesus wept. When you weep for your loved ones, when we remember the saints that have gone before us, from our families, from our friends, from our loved ones, from our pasts, Jesus is right there beside you weeping because he cares about your tears. That's why he gives you the promise that one day those tears are all going to be wiped away. They matter now to him because one day he's going to wipe them all away. It's not, here's a golden ticket to heaven that you can redeem in 50, 60, 70 years. It's a promise that one day death is going to be gone and there's going to be no more crying. And right now, I know it's going to be hard. Right now, the effect of sin is still there. So I'm going to come into this world and I'm going to walk with you in it. And I'm going to cry right beside you in that chair, in that bedroom, in that car when you're going through the middle of it. Ultimately, though, Isaiah, he says that on the day that Jesus comes back, we're going to say, "Behold, this is our God. We have waited for him, that he might save us. This is the Lord. We have waited for him. Let us be glad and rejoice in his salvation." Remember what I told you to remember and hold on to at the beginning. The feast aspect in the first verse. This feast, as we know, it's not an ordinary feast. It's not just some big meal. It's a wedding feast. In Revelation 19, verse 9, it says, "Then the angel said to me, write this, blessed are those who are invited to the wedding feast of the Lamb." That wedding feast of Jesus with his church that comes when he comes again to bring all of this to total completion is the feast that Isaiah is writing about. And so it's a wedding feast. A feast between a bride and a groom. As we know, Jesus being the groom, us, his church, being the bride. A few weeks ago, I got to go to a wedding of one of my very best friends at seminary. His name's Hank, and he got married to Stacy. And I got to watch as my favorite part of the wedding came. Stacy, she entered the church looking as beautiful as ever. And she strode down the aisle. And I looked at Hank, and I saw those tears start to well up in his eyes. And I start to see it, and I watched them as they ran down his cheeks. Because this was a day that I know, because I'm really good friends with him, he had been counting down on his calendar until he got to this day. He had been checking them off day by day. I can't wait till I get to be with her for all time. For the rest of my life, I'm going to be with that woman, and I can't wait for it. And so that's what those tears meant for him. That day had finally come. And so this feast that Isaiah, he's writing about, he says, "Behold, this is our God. We have waited for him." But I want you to hear today that Jesus also is waiting for that day with you. Jesus is waiting for that day that he gets to be with his bride. That he, the ultimate groom, gets to be with the church, his bride, and stand at the end of the aisle as we are finally made ready, as it says in Revelation. "Behold, the bride has been made ready. The wedding feast of the Lamb has come." And we will walk down that aisle. And on the face of Jesus will be the last tears that are ever shed for all of eternity. Only they'll be tears of joy, not tears of sorrow, not tears of sadness. There'll be tears of joy because he knows that never once again will any of you or any Christian ever weep tears of sadness. His day will finally come when none of us will be sorrowful again. And it means so much to him because he's here with you right now, weeping tears of sadness in your time of struggle. So those tears of joy mean that much more to him. Because every tear that you've ever cried of sorrow and sadness over any death, over any bad news that you've ever received, Jesus cried them right beside you, and he can't wait for the day that those are wiped away forever. And he gets to shed the very final tears of joy as we walk down that aisle. That's why it says, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted in those Beatitudes. Because Jesus comforts us in our mourning. He knows the effects of sin and death on this world. And so that's what it means that the resurrection of Jesus applies to me. That as I walk through this world, as I go about my day by day, as I huddle in a room with my family crying over my uncle's death, as you cry over the diagnosis that you hear from a loved one or from your own doctor, as you think about your grandparents or whoever it was that has passed away, Jesus is sitting on the couch right beside you, crying with you, holding your hand in it, waiting for the day when he comes again and those tears are gone for all of eternity. It matters so much to him that he went to death on a cross and cried out to God, my God, why have you forsaken me? So that we don't have to be forsaken, so that we can be with him, so that we can be his bride, so that he can be with you in the painstaking waiting between now and then. And we can say with him, Lord, I've waited for you too. In Jesus' name, amen.